Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Tuesday, and that's Tag Tuesday, even when one is buried under deadlines. I am buried under a deadline that is just looming larger and larger. You'd think if that were true, I'd be concentrating on that, but instead of making videos, but I like making videos too, and I still have time. I have the whole of the evening and the whole of the night. I'm hoping that if I just keep my nose to the grindstone, that will be good enough to get me a lead sufficient so that I can finish up either later tonight or tomorrow. So that's time enough for a tag. And I miss talking to my imaginary BookTube friends. It's tomorrow that'll be the crunch day. Tomorrow there might be only one video. Not a library tour, no tags, no discussion videos, no picking on anybody except Michael K. Vaughan. Tomorrow is Comic Book Wednesday, and I don't want to miss that video, but that might be the only one, and a lot of you aren't interested in that. So, but for today, I thought I'd do a tag. There's a tag that's going around. All the cool kids are doing it, and none of them are tagging me because they all hate me because I smell. So I thought I'd just horn my way in, like the ugly kid at the prom. It's the birth year book tag. Which I saw on CriminOIly's channel, but since then, Book Time with Elvis has done it. Jason Harrigan has done it. I think I've watched a couple of others too. So I thought I'd do it as well. It's not that long, although I'm going to make it longer, I'm sure. And it's all about the year you were born. So on this channel, we're talking 1994. And the first question is, have you read any books published in the year you were born? I've done a lot of historical reading. Yeah, so I've read a lot of books. If we go through them just briefly for highlights for fiction, one highlight from 1994 would be A Scent of Wonder, David Hartwell's great science fiction anthology, one of the great science fiction anthologies of all time. Great big brick of a thing that I don't currently have. That's really worth it. Those of you who email me and ask what's a really good science fiction anthology, that is a really good science fiction anthology. But in terms of fiction, 1994 was a largely disappointing year. There were some highlights, but even the highlights tended to go on a bit. Like, for instance, When Christ and His Saints Slept by Sharon K. Penman came out that year. And it's, those of you who know this author, she writes historical novels, and they can be involving. When Christ and His Saints Slept has a very good premise, but a very good time period, a fruitful time period for setting a novel, but it goes on a bit long. Same thing with Voyager by Diana Gabaldon that came out in 1994. It's, in my opinion, the least effective of the Outlander novels. There's also Virtual Light by William Gibson, the author of Neuromancer. Ordinarily, I think that Gibson is underrated. He's a really good stylist. Not a very good plotter, but a really good stylist. Virtual Light I didn't think had much going for it. And also the same thing is true with Waterworks by E.L. Doctorow. The famous author of Ragtime, and also not to say that I'm not saying that his talents decreased over time, because Billy Bathgate, a later novel, is brilliant in my opinion. And the same thing is true with Taltos by Anne Rice, an almost plotless novel. I thought it was just a total misfire. I realized by the time Taltos came out, you really couldn't tell that to Anne Rice, but I nevertheless think it's true. Did I have any positives here? Well, one positive was A Drink Before the War by Dennis Lehane, which I thought was very, very good. Maybe the first book of his that showed me how good he could be if he left the strict formula of mystery novels behind. And then for nonfiction, we have The Beak of the Finch by Jonathan Weiner, which is subtitled something like Evolution in Real Time. He went to an island in the Galapagos to watch native finches over an extended period of time, and noticed that in periods of drought, when the shells of the seeds that they live on grew harder and thicker, their beaks got bigger. The finches' beaks got bigger. They started selecting for larger beaks. In The Beak of the Finch, Weiner says, this is evolution writ small. This is visual, real-time confirmation that these processes do happen. And science-denying religious fundamentalists here in America have said ever since that book came out, no, that just means that finches can grow their beaks bigger and smaller. It doesn't have anything to do with evolution. And there's no talking to them. There's no moving them out of that camp. It's a fairly interesting book, though. And we have Naturalist by E.O. Wilson, who recently just died. A great anecdotal. He basically, aside from his technical books about ants, he basically wrote the same book over and over again for 40 years. And it's a delightful mix of personal anecdotes and field anecdotes about being a naturalist. There's also, let's see here, The Catcher Was a Spy by Nicholas Davidoff about Mo Berg. It was a runaway hit in 1994. A really good story. about a Major League Baseball player who was also working for the CIA. You have Same-Sex Unions in Pre-Modern Europe by John Boswell, a book that I think we've talked about on this channel before. Boswell overclaims. He makes claims that his own evidence doesn't really support about how widespread and how accepted same-sex unions were before the Catholic Church came along and messed everything up. It was still invigorating reading. I mean, you're going to read historical vignettes there, people and characters and places that you've never encountered before. I value it for that. There was The Rape of Europa by Lynn Nicholas, about the Nazi depredation of fine art all throughout the countries that they conquered. There's The Intelligence of Dogs by Stanley Coren, a book that it purports to try to figure out just how intelligent dogs are, but as with so many books on this subject, what it's doing is trying to figure out how close to human intelligence dogs are. When the book absolutely does not see that there could be different kinds of intelligence. Most of the books like this they absolutely do not see that. They're not bigoted, they're just completely blinkered. They think the closer you get to the way humans think, the closer you are to intelligence. And this book does that, unfortunately, but it still has lots of great reading in it. And also The Western Canon by Harold Bloom. Great big thing where he basically tells the whole world what they should read, what's valuable and what's not. But this year also had some real stinkeroos. One small and one big. Not stinkeroos necessarily in the case of quality, although the first one stinks on that too. But in terms of just the tangle of bad conversations that they started. The first is Elizabeth Wurtzel, Prozac Nation, came out in 1994. It has, some of you may remember her dreamily depressed picture on the cover. An utterly ridiculous thing that I believe was one of the harbingers of lazy, zillennial, self-pitying entitlement. At one point in the book, she talks about how her ongoing struggles with what I firmly believe are completely psychosomatic, psychological problems are just about as bad as war in Bosnia. But far more, overshadowing that, much more, is The Bell Curve. A book called The Bell Curve came out in 1994. I listed its two authors, Richard Herrnstein and, of course, Charles Murray, were the authors of The Bell Curve, a book in which they examined the explosive subject of whether or not there is a biological grounding for IQ. At least that on paper is what they purported to start to want to do. Right? That if you have different so-called races of human beings, actually we're just one species, but if you have different so-called races of human beings, well, a European from Norway is not going to look like a young man from China. There are going to be phenotypical differences, maybe even some other differences too in biochemistry, in the genetic makeup. They'll be minor tweaks, but they still might be there. And you can make curves and charts and whatnot analyzing that. And what Hornstein and Murray did was say, well, what if that's also true for intelligence? If we can map human qualities onto human populations and human races for every other variable, why can't we do it for intelligence? Of course, one of the main reasons why you can't do it for intelligence is because thereby you open the door to scientific racism. Thereby you say, well, what if black people are dumber than white people? What if their brains are smaller or less effective? It was comments like that got, for instance, the Canadian cod philosopher Stefan Molyneux banned from every social media platform in the world because he went on the idiot Dave Rubin's show and simply flat out said that black people have smaller brains than white people. Utterly ridiculous. If it had been anyone but Dave Rubin, the host would have walked off the set or ordered him off the set. Instead, Rubin's just sitting there going, because he's about as dumb as a post. He's as I heard the other day, he's as dumb as a bag of toenails. But the Bell Curve came out in 1994. So as you can see, it was a fairly uneven year. Then there's some follow-up questions here. If you've read any book from the year you were born, what is your favorite? I think if I had to pick an overall favorite, it would probably be Winter Dance by Gary Paulson. His book about the Iditarod, a dog sled race across the snowy winterlands of Alaska. An event that will not be possible in a few years. It won't be held anymore. Or it'll be done with snowmobiles or something like that because the permanent snow coverage won't be there. It'll be there for freak storms, and then it will disappear in 70-degree weather in the middle of December. But Winter Dance is a beautiful book. Gary Paul, I'm a big fan of him anyway, but Winter Dance is a wonderful book. But then there are follow-up questions. Do you have any other favorites? If you haven't read any books this year, which one do you pledge to read in the next 6 months, and why have you chosen it? What on earth? I'm supposed to pledge to read a book. What is it, the Freemasons? I'm not going to pledge to read anything. Let's just move on to the second question. Have you read any books published in the year you turned 18? I turned 18 in 2012. So we'll be looking at 2012. And for this, since I was very precocious as a newborn, it turns out that my literary blog, Steve Reads, on Steve Reads every year, I do a list of the year's best and worst books. And I did entries for 2012, so where I give you, descriptions of the 10 best and worst books in general fiction and general nonfiction, as well as a bunch of other categories. For fiction, I had Hope, a Tragedy by Shalom Auslander, Telegraph Avenue by Michael Chabon, Dead Stars by the criminally underrated Bruce Wagner, John Saturnal's Feast by Lawrence Norfolk, At Last by Edward St. Aubin, The Sickness by Alberto Herrera Tizca, The Orphan Master's Son by Adam Johnson, Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel was not my number one, but it was up there. In Sunlight and in Shadow by Mark Halperin, his sequel to Winter's Tale that is fantastic. And the best book of that year for fiction was The Street Sweeper by Elliot Perlman. No one remembers, no one talks about it anymore. I think it got a paperback, but it's never been reprinted, and maybe it never will be. Unbelievably complex and moving book. And then for nonfiction, the first one was a 2-volume box set on politics by Alan Ryan. Then Jesus, a Theography by Leonard Sweet and Frank Viola. Very good, controversial, contentious work of religious inquiry. Then Pulpo, a Venetian cookbook by Russell Norman, it's beautiful physically, but it's also very evocatively done. Weird that a cookbook would be on the list, but it stuck with me for months. It's really, really good. Although, as I think I say in my list, I strongly advise that you don't use most of the recipes that are in Pulpo, because most of them involve killing and cooking, not necessarily in that order, cephalopods who are every bit as smart and humorous and sensitive and cultural as you are, which means they shouldn't be on your menu as things to eat. But nevertheless, the book was really good. Then The Signal and the Noise by Nate Silver, a statistician who went on to great prominence and then rightfully fell from that prominence. When statisticians start to believe that they've got a hotline to the divine, they're going to fall. The next set of predictions are going to be wrong. Nate Silver certainly did not do what I did. He did not predict that Donald Trump would win the 2016 presidential election. And trust me when I tell you, he has no idea what's going to happen in 2022, and I do. So, but anyway, The Signal and the Noise was really, really good. Then New Ways to Kill Your Mother by Colm Tóibín, a study of a series of literary studies that was very, very enjoyable. New York Drawings by Adrian Tomine, a series of New Yorker-style cartoons that are very, very good. I could not get enough of them. Don't have the book, but I wish I did. Then Dive Deeper by George Kotkin, a book about Moby Dick that I thought was really, really good. Then Reinventing Bach by Paul Elie, great study of Johann Sebastian Bach. And Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who's gone on to say all sorts of dicey things since this book. But I think Anti-Fragile's main message is that relentlessly sheltering your children from any kind of adversity, it weakens them. It makes them poorer people. It's not just a question of saying, well, they're going to hit adversity sooner or later. It's that yes, we all agree they're going to hit adversity sooner or later. You can't protect them for the rest of their lives. But the Taleb's point is that when they do hit that inevitable adversity, you will have hurt them quite a bit in how they can respond to it. And the number one for nonfiction was Far From the Tree by Andrew Solomon. Great study of heredity and mental depression and mental issues of all kinds and what they do in the family dynamic. Great big wonderful book. So that was 2012. That was a brief overview. You can go online and find the whole list there. Then question number 3 is, of the last 100 books you read, how many were published before you were born? What were they? Do you prefer them to newer books? The one that stands out for me just recently was Death of a Peer by Niall Marsh. a novel that is set in the late 1930s and came out in like 1940, 1941, something like that. And in a rare instance where the American title is much better than the UK title. The UK title was something like A Surfeit of Lampreys. The novel revolves around a poor aristocratic family called the Lampreys. There are a whole bunch of them. There's the mother and the father. There's a deaf aunt. There are a whole bunch of children, including the requisite twins. And they have a sprawling, two-suite apartment in London. They absolutely cannot afford. They are running up bills everywhere. They've got the head of the family, Sir Charles, is the brother of the peer in question in the title of the book. He's the brother of a marquis who has a gigantic house out in the countryside and a house in London, and who has enough money to float the family. And they invite their cousin to come to their place in London so that they can put the touch on him, so that they can make the case that he has to save them. Because if he doesn't, he's going to go through the embarrassment of having his own family members in the poverty courts. And the conversation between the two brothers does not go well. And the brother, the older brother, the peer, wasn't going to help them anyway. He just wanted a chance to come to London to yell at them. And he then orders he calls for his wife and orders they're going to leave right away. They're not staying for supper. They're not going anywhere else. They get on the lift, on the little elevator in between the two wings of the Lampreys' apartment, and head out. And the family is stunned because they have no idea what they're going to do now. The one thing on which they pinned all their hopes is gone. When suddenly they hear a horrible, horrible scream coming from the lift. And when it comes back up, the doors open, and the peer's wife falls out in a panic. And the peer is dead inside the lift with a meat skewer rammed through his eye into his brain. And the police come, and the novel takes place in the course of 12 hours. Most of the novel is the policeman, Detective Chief Inspector Allen, just interviewing various family members together and then separately, one after another after another. The action doesn't break at all, except once at the very end of the book. It doesn't break. We just get a better and better portrait of the Lamprey family, who are portrayed as absolutely useless when it comes to anything practical, but utterly charming. To the point where, when the interviews are wrapping up well into the book, you're really hoping that none of them did it. You're encouraged in a book like this to start to think who did it, but you're really hoping that it wasn't one of them, because they are portrayed universally as a charming family. And I thought Death of a Peer, I read it years and years ago as a paperback. I thought it was incredibly good and much better than I thought, much better than I remember it being. So that's the last one that I read that was written before I was born. And then question number 4 is what's your favorite movie from your birth year and why? And my birth year had some big movies. I had Pulp Fiction, Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. I jotted down a whole bunch of things here. I'd had The Madness of King George. Nicholas Hintner adapted Alan Bennett's play into a movie starring Nigel Hamilton? I forget who I'm blanking right now on who played King George. Very effective. Ian Holm is in it. He's very, very good. There was also Street Fighter, which was the last movie that Jean-Claude Van Damme, the Muscles from Brussels, did that was actually cheerable. After this movie, he starts to become a kind of weird parody of himself. Until this movie, you get the sense that he knew that he was in on the joke. And after this movie, that sense goes away. But this movie is terrific, except that Raul Julia is in it, and you're looking at it the whole time thinking, oh my God, how sick he looks. And he didn't have long to live when he made the movie, but it's still entertaining. What else I got here? Oh yes, The Shawshank Redemption. That so many dude bros just worship. They just worship that movie. They know every line of it by heart. Also, Forrest Gump, Robert Zemeckis, adapted from a novel by Winston Groom. That people seem to love that movie a lot more than I understand. I don't understand why it is loved the way that it is. I think it's kind of dumb. But it came out in 1994, which was the year we're talking about. Also, The Lion King. I remember going to The Three Musketeers, starring Tim Curry as Cardinal Richelieu, and a very young Chris O'Donnell with long, flowing hair as I'm blanking on the name. Oh my god. Well, anyway, who was paying attention to the script when he takes his shirt off anyway? Certainly not me. But I went to see that movie. I remember Tim Curry does a great little vamping thing that I believe was ad-libbed, where he says, "All for one and more for me." But before I got to that movie, which is resolutely average, hence I can't remember anything about it except that, before I got to that, there was a 5-minute preview of The Lion King that simply was the circle of life, the whole of that musical number that starts the movie. They didn't clip it. It wasn't the preview wasn't jerking all around. It was just that musical number. And I was completely blown away, absolutely blown away by that number. I'd never seen anything like it. I'd never heard anything like it. I didn't want the movie to start. I wanted to watch that movie instead. And I ended up loving The Lion King, as everyone does. Let's see, what else we got here? Oh, 8 Seconds. Luke Perry playing Lane Frost, the tragic bull rider who was injured by a bull, killed. This movie, well, I've got another one on here. Right, the Street Fighter was, I think, if you can call it this, it's a little bit funny to say, the pinnacle of Jean-Claude Van Damme's legitimate career, where you could go to a movie and he was winking at you and you were winking at him. The kind of thing that Schwarzenegger never lost. Schwarzenegger's been winking at you the whole time. He gets it. He knows what he is. And that makes all of his movies enjoyable to watch. After this, Jean-Claude Van Damme didn't seem to get it anymore. And so you could call this the pinnacle of his art. And I would say the same thing for 8 Seconds. Luke Perry was, he got very tempting, easy money doing Hollywood sudsy melodrama, or TV sudsy melodramas. And I think that blunts people to the fact that he was really talented. You can see it, bits and pieces of it in 8 Seconds. And you never saw anything better from him. This was the last chance that he got to do anything like that, which really sort of bugs me. You know, when I wish that maybe his career had taken a different path. Then we have Legends of the Fall, a movie with 2 highlights. It's got terrible acting by Anthony Hopkins. It's got terrible acting by everyone. It's, of course, got terrible acting by Brad Pitt, who can't do any other kind of acting. But you do get to see Brad Pitt beaten, dead, horribly murdered, and horribly bloodied and whatnot. That's always fun. It also has an incredible score by James Horner. James Horner is he's great no matter what he scores, but he's really good in Legends of the Fall. We have It's Pat, Julia Sweeney. The great Julia Sweeney had a recurring Saturday Night Live character called Pat, who people never knew whether Pat was male or female. And the skits were always built around elaborate efforts on the part of everyone on the show to try and figure that out, to try and winkle that detail out of Pat. And it never worked. And that's a fairly simple idea for a skit. But Julia Sweeney is so talented. She's just so amazing. I strongly urge you to go and see, maybe on YouTube, maybe her show Letting Go of God is on. It will put a smile on your face, no matter how religious or unreligious you are, because she's such a great storyteller. And we'll end up with the greatest movie from 1994, which is, of course, Speed, starring Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock on a bus that can't slow down. Come now. Is there any question? Then we'll move on to the last question, which is, what's your favorite movie from the year you turned 18? And why? That's good, because we're running out of light. I have to go. I can't make a string of videos. I have made a string of videos, but I have to wrap this up. So we're just going to finish up with movies that are from 2012, when I turned 18. And we'll start with the most frustrating one of all, a movie called John Carter, which sounds like it's about an insurance salesman in Omaha. Because for some reason, the movie theaters decided that it was a good idea to leave out of the title John Carter of Mars. They left that out. But it's a gigantic multi-million-dollar special effects extravaganza about John Carter of Mars, about Edgar Rice Burroughs' famous character who goes to Mars. Imagine a Hollywood studio deciding to take Mars out of the title. It stars Taylor Kitsch, who I think is a lot like Luke Perry in that he can do better work than he's usually given. He does a fairly good job. It's not that bad a movie. I'm mainly mystified by the marketing, and it didn't go anywhere. It fizzled, I think, largely because of marketing. I don't think it's a case of, like, for instance, Taylor Kitsch was also in an awful movie called Battleship that sank, no pun intended, at the box office because it's bad. It's really, really bad. It got good marketing, but it's a bad movie. John Carter, Esquire, got bad marketing, and it's a good movie. But anyway, Uh, what's the next one on the list here for 2012? Lincoln. Uh, uh, Steven Spielberg and Daniel Day-Lewis, deeply in character as Abraham Lincoln. Weird, disjointed movie where everyone involved, but especially Spielberg, clearly thought they did not need to tell a story, which is what you think if you're telling a saint's life. And I'd rather not see that. I mean, there were good bits and pieces in it, but I'd rather not see that. The same thing was the problem with Anthony Hopkins in Amistad. If you set out to tell a saint's life, where's the interest? Speaking of the aforementioned Brad Pitt, he's terrible, so I'm not recommending him. But there was a movie called Killing Them Softly, and it was adapted from a novel called Kogan's Trade by George Higgins. I don't recommend the movie, but I strongly recommend the book. Go and find as much George Higgins as you can and read it. You're going to love it. And talk about bad marketing. He's gone. I don't think that, aside from the Friends of Eddie Coyle, I don't think you'll ever have a chance to see his books in a bookstore again. Certainly he'll never be in the Library of America. So if you can find a copy of Kogan's Trade, go and read it. But I can't recommend the book. Can't recommend Skyfall. Skyfall came out in 2012. Just one of these big, extra loud, mean, nihilistic, stupid, not funny James Bond movies. All the essence of the cinematic James Bond that made those movies, those earlier movies, so special, just surgically removed. And what do we get instead? A 4-foot-tall, glowering, constantly unhappy, infinitely wounded action star, no different than any other. No sophistication, no savoir-faire, no good one-liners, except when he's about to blow somebody's head off or something nihilistic like that. Just, did you have anything to recommend from 2012? 2012, if you look at a list of movies from 2012, you can really see the degradation of Hollywood. Suddenly, the list, for instance, between 1994 and 2012 is completely different. 2012, it's remake after remake after remake after remake after remake, where they were few and far between, only a decade earlier. Or 2 decades earlier, whatever that is. But anyway, like the next one I have in mind is the big Hollywood version of Les Miserables with Hugh Jackman and Russell Crowe doing their own singing. They adapted the musical, but they didn't bring in any singing cast. Instead, the stars, Eddie Redmayne, 6 packs a day, doing his own singing. How can you do breath exercises when one half of your lung tissue is hard black soil? And it ends up being just awful. Also, a movie called Flight with Denzel Washington. I'm a huge Denzel Washington fan. I love how he picks his movies, and they're almost always watchable. Flight is a little bit maudlin. It goes on a little bit long. I would watch his Equalizer movies 1 and 2 over and over again on repeat till the cows come home. Flight, maybe not so much, but Flight does have one unbelievable sequence where the main character, he plays a pilot, a commercial airline pilot who is an alcoholic and has hid that fact from everybody. And there's one unbelievable sequence in the movie where he is asleep. He's asleep at the wheel. The plane is largely flying itself. He has a co-pilot. And suddenly there's a huge problem. Pressure just disappears. The plane starts to catapult out of the sky. This guy wakes up. Denzel Washington's character wakes up, and he might be an alcoholic, but he has an enormous amount of experience. He's the greatest pilot in the world, and he manages to save the day. But oh my God, that sequence! You will never get on a plane again. What else before we wrap up? Ang Lee's Life of Pi, absolutely beautiful movie. Almost reconciled me to the book. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. He's of course got a second burst of life with his Spider-Man. Here, let's see if we can shed some light on something. He's got a little burst of life for his Spider-Man because the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man is in Spider-Man No Way Home, the latest Spider-Man movie that's raking in millions and millions of dollars. Could become one of the highest grossing movies of all time. And one of the characters in there is Andrew Garfield reprising his role as his version of Spider-Man. But oh my God, in his own movie, his Spider-Man is utterly insufferable. Just insufferable. It is a bad sign. If you have a Spider-Man movie and 2/3 of the way through, you are really hoping that the villain kills him. He's just awful. He's the worst kind of zillennial powder. And if you're that as Peter Parker, when you start to punch people as Spider-Man, it's going to come across as just you being an a-hole, no matter how deserving they are. And it does. It's just, it's like, okay, so we also have Peter Jackson. The first of his Hobbit movies came out in 2012. Martin Freeman doing a great job as Bilbo Baggins, but everyone in the world agrees. Everyone in the world agrees that it should have been one movie, not a trilogy. And that to make it a trilogy, you have to pump in a huge amount of stuff that isn't in the book. And Peter Jackson goes on to do that to universally condemned results. That it's a gigantic mess. But there are parts at the beginning of the first movie that are fairly good. So I have just a few more listed here, and then we'll be done. I've got to get back to work. Oh, Hunger Games, Jennifer Lawrence, based on the series where teenagers hunt each other for advancement, for credits for their family. I know that the Hunger Games has lots of fans. I think there are a lot of fans of the movie as well. I thought the movie was much better done than the book, but that's not saying much. The book read like it was written by a small child with a brain injury. But when we're talking about 2012 movies, surely we have to end, as we ended 1994 with Speed, surely we end 2012 with The Elephant in the Room. The Avengers, which took a whole bunch of established cinematic characters from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and brought them together in a juggernaut team movie that sort of changed the way cinema is done. It proved that this kind of a thing can be done, that you can make the world's biggest soap opera, the world's slowest comic book, multi-million-dollar movie connected to another multi-million-dollar movie connected to another one. The Avengers as a movie would have made no sense if Captain America had not been a movie, if Iron Man had not been a movie, if the Hulk had not had a couple of tries and fails, so that when the Hulk is done right, as he is in the Avengers, suddenly fans stand up and cheer. If Thor hadn't had his own movie, you couldn't bring these, if Black Widow hadn't already appeared, you couldn't bring these things together in that movie. Imagine how much of the Avengers as a movie would have been devoted purely to exposition if it had been done any other way. If it had been done the normal way, then half the movie would have had to be exposition. Whereas the thing that the Avengers was freed from needing to do was exactly that. It had 6 movies as exposition, 6 previous movies. Instead, it could just launch into its story. What a movie. What a movie. Perfect balance of dumb action, heart-touching heroics, great comic moments, and also a couple of scenes where it doesn't feel like superhero dialogue. Some of you will remember the scene between Tony Stark and Loki towards the conclusion of the movie. It feels like 2 actors playing parts instead of just cut and paste comic book movie dialogue. Same thing with there's a group discussion scene in the midpoint of the movie that is really well done. None of the characters have filler dialogue. They're all saying what they would say, and they're saying it the way adults would talk to each other. So I will end with a strong recommendation. I don't think there are any other questions. We'll end with a strong recommendation for the Avengers and for Speed. And that's it. That is the birth year book tag. I'm out of time. No one tagged me, so out of bitterness, I'm not going to tag anyone. You're all tagged. You should all do this because it's a lot of fun. And I'd love to hear from some of my other 90s kids. Thank you, BookTube.